Did you ever spend an extremely long time practicing and working on a lick or a solo, but you just weren't able to nail it, or at least not up to tempo? To break through plateaus like this, rather than more practice time, we often need more effective practice methods. What's great about the lick that I just played is it's perfect for teaching 5 of these secret practice methods. So in this video, I'll show exactly how to play this lick, what these 5 practice methods are, and how to use them to nail pretty much any lick that you want. Before I can get to the secret practice methods, let's talk about the most famous practice method of all. Number 1, slow practice. By the way, this is the lick played very slowly. And the idea is that you would take a metronome and play the lick perfectly at a very slow speed, perhaps even as slow as half speed or less, and repeat it perfectly 4 times at that tempo, and then add a very, very small amount of speed, and continue doing this until, in theory, you will eventually reach the full speed lick absolutely perfect. This is actually a very good way of internalizing or cleaning up a lick, or getting used to playing a lick in a different key. However, slow practice is not the most efficient way to work on your technique or speed. Why is this? If you can very easily play a lick at a very, very slow speed, after a certain number of repetitions, you are kind of starting to waste your time. It makes no sense to spend an equal amount of time practicing an entire lick when there's only one small part of it that's giving you a problem. It's far more efficient to spend more of your time on that difficult part and then tie it all together at the end. Now that said, if you are making a lot of mistakes at the slow speed, I would say you need to spend some time on the slow practice and get that consistency up before you start working on the speed. But usually, to improve speed and technique, we have to push our limits. So what is a better practice method to do just that? Number 2, loops. So loops is where you take a small chunk of the lick and repeat it like an exercise, kind of like this. So these first 6 notes could be the first loop. And then I could move on and do this. I might use this as a loop to practice. So I have... And then we could use this as a loop. That's actually a typical Paul Gilbert kind of pattern. Now what's going to happen with most licks is there's going to be parts of the lick that are harder than others. For me, the most difficult part of this lick is this loop here. Because it has a bit of a stretch, it has a slide with the first finger and a position shift all happening at once. And there's a temptation to not stretch far enough and play it like this. But that note's wrong, right? So we want to do the stretch, the full stretch. So what I would usually do is create a loop which is of only the difficult part, which is the loop that I just played. I would also use a loop which runs into the difficult part, like this. And also a loop coming out. Now there is a similar but even more effective way to practice for speed and technique, which we'll look at next. And that's my favorite, number 3, burst speed practice. This is probably the ultimate way to practice for speed and precision. Now there are 2 main ways to work on burst speed. I'm going to set my metronome to 90 beats per minute so you can see how this works. I'm going to use a slow note division like 16ths to play one of our loops. I'm going to take that Paul Gilbert loop as an example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in bursts of 30-second notes. So it's going to sound like this. The other way to practice is to not play the slower note division and just play the burst on its own. Another thing I like to do with speed bursts is over-engineer the lick. So for instance, even if my goal tempo for this lick was 95 beats per minute or 100 beats per minute, I could practice it at 110 or even faster. And reach a point where I can play every single loop in the lick at that higher speed, so that when I've stitched the whole thing together, even the goal tempo won't feel that fast. It's kind of over-engineering your technique. So if you use loops and burst speed to practice the lick, and then go back to slow practice after a while, and gradually increase the speed, you'll probably notice that the whole lick will be getting so much cleaner and faster than it's ever been. But this next method will help you bulletproof a lick so you'll make even less mistakes. Practice method number 4, unforgiving tones. And it's where you use a variety of different tones to practice a lick. You see, if you use a lot of distortion, it helps you by compressing what you're playing, but it hurts you by making string noise really loud. But if you practice with a clean tone, it hurts you by making things very much not compressed, and it makes little hammer-ons and pull-offs a lot quieter than what you want them to be. But it also means you can get away with not muting as much. So the answer is to make sure that for any given lick, you practice it with all different kinds of tones. And if you do this, the lick's going to become more consistent, and you'll be able to play it under pressure, like in live situations. Speaking of which, have you ever known a lick like the back of your hand, but as soon as you try to play it in front of someone, or at a jam night, it just falls apart? If that's the case, then the 5th and final practice approach might be the fix. Now, it's really easy to transpose or change key on guitar, right? Any piano player is going to tell you that, but of course it's not true. Just moving up and down on the neck is simple in theory. Up here, frets are very close together, and down here they're very far apart. So down here, you have to have lots of flexibility. At the top, it will also feel completely different, and you have to have a lot of dexterity, and you have to have a lot more accuracy because your target is so much smaller. And you probably already know that moving a lick just by 1 fret makes it feel completely different. But if you really want to master a lick, you should be able to play it in every key. And what I like to do is, at the very least, play it in the key that I learned it in, that I practice it in, but then also play it on the highest possible place on the neck as well as the lowest possible place on the neck. So for our lick, in C sharp right at the top, for me I've got 24 frets. If you've got 22, then you'll be in B. But basically it sounds like this. Possibly even worse is going as low as possible. 1 octave lower is about as low as I can play it. Difficult part again. That's about as far as I can stretch. In theory, you could play this in B flat, but I can't play it in B flat because I can't stretch that far. But if I had a little tiny guitar or massive hands, then I'd be able to play it down in that key as well. But the point is that you want to practice in all the keys in between if you really, really want to master the lick. Now, for one final bonus tip, with a lick like this, which has every note is the same length, you could change the note division. For instance, I like to practice this lick as 16th note triplets as well. Normal 16ths. And then 16th note triplets. And what that does as well is it makes it more versatile. It means that you can play the lick at tempos which wouldn't necessarily otherwise be ideal. So feel free to steal this legato lick for your own solos, grabbing the tabs, as well as a cheat sheet with all 5 practice methods, which is all free, link in the description. But who else could you steal licks from? Well, some say this guy invented shred guitar as we know it today. So click this video next for a detailed breakdown of his mind-blowing soloing techniques so that you can use them for your own solos too.